Quorum yet? What, we're good? Okay, I'm going to call to order the September 13, 2016 Ventura County Air Pollution Control Board to order. Roll call.
That would be important.
Board Member
for our
Bennett?
voters.
Here. Board Member Foy? Board Member Long? Here. Board Member Morgan? Board Member Parks? Here. Board Member Pollock?
Here?
Board Member Ramirez?
Here.
Board Member Sharkey? Present. Board Member Tucker? And Board Member Zaragoza.
Here. Okay, so we have a quorum. So our next item is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please follow me. Okay, thank you. Our next item is the minutes of the Air Pollution Control Board held June 28th. Did I say airport? My God. APCD. I'm still Thursday week. So do we have
I'll
a
move
motion?
approval of the minutes.
I need to abstain as I wasn't present. I know there's a rule that says I could do it, but it's just for the record, I was not present at the last meeting.
Okay, so do we have a second? Second. Okay, first and second. All in favor?
Aye.
I
Okay,
abstain.
that's approved. And let me see, the agenda review. Any concerns or minor revisions by the board? Seeing none, okay. Public comments? Rosa, I don't have any public. Okay. Next item is board items. Does any board members have any board items they'd like to bring up?
Would just like to say that I was invited to go on a trade delegation to China at the beginning of August, which was very, very interesting, very good. John Chung, our state treasurer, led the delegation of mayors from Southern California and North Las Vegas, and I did appreciate that every city we went to in China, the very large cities, millions of people in these cities, starting with Beijing and Indian and Canton, air is very polluted. People are struggling with their children's asthma. You would drive into town from the airport at night, and you were hoping you were seeing fog, but it was not fog, it was smog. So I want to wish the people of China and our country well in dealing with air pollution. It has significant health effects for our vulnerable people, our children especially, and I think the people of China really recognize it, but it's not so easy. I actually acquired a throat irritation. I've been back a month, I still have it. So serious stuff, but China is, I recommend it to everybody, but just go when the weather's a little less hot. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. And by the way, we have new mics, you know, if you don't have to be that close to the microphone now. Just for information. I'd like to share, you know, that Mike and I went to Washington, D.C. for the Voluntary Vessel Speed Reduction Program. And we had a very productive trip to Washington, D.C. in June. And we had the opportunity to receive the U.S. EPA's Clean Air Excellence Award for 2014, the Voluntary Vessel Speed Reduction Program, to meet with the head of the, we met with the head of the U.S. EPA, and I know that quite a few board members had a lot to do with that. And so anyway, the 2014 program resulted in 27 vessels voluntarily slowing down under 12 knots during their transit in the Santa Barbara Channel. This achieved emission reductions of 12 tons of nitrogen oxides and 500 metric tons of greenhouse gases. In addition, there were no whales that struck during the recorded 27 vessels in the channel. We also worked on meeting with staff members from our Congress delegation, representatives, Lowenthal's legislative director, really great individual that was going to help us a lot. At the meeting, Representative Lowenthal's office focused on opportunities to facilitate the vessel speed reduction program in the future. And Mike, do you have any additional information you'd like to share with us? It was really great to be there at the EPA Center.
Yeah, I felt it was a very productive meeting at Representative Lowenthal's office. His office represents Long Beach with obviously the Port of Long Beach, so they're very aware of marine vessel emission issues down there, Long Beach being kind of an environmental justice issue in of itself. And it just sounded like he had some concepts working with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration on ways to basically make this program sustainable without funding for incentives. So basically to move it on a green shipping platform that might, and I've seen some emails exchanged with the shipping companies that are actually looking at getting the public relations benefit from slowing down, vessel speed reduction off California coast. So,
And Mike, it was great also working with the Santa Barbara Air Pollution Control Board. What was her name? I can't.
Erin Arlen Genet, yes, she's the new air pollution control officer for Santa Barbara.
She was really, really great to work with. So that's what I wanted to share. Any other board comments? John?
I guess. Mr. Chair, I had the pleasure to attend the electric vehicle show at the Channel Islands Harbor. Saw my old friend Kent Bullard, who's still working in alternative fuels. There was just quite an array of variety of different kinds of electric vehicles, and there was some discussion about the voucher program that APCD has been doing, and a lot of suggestions on how to make it better. But it was out there at the adjacent to the farmers market. A lot of people were walking by. A lot of people were very interested in what was going on there. It was very interesting.
They had a good write-up in the paper on that. That was great.
And Mr. Chair, I'd also like to point out the flowers here are not for me, they're for Supervisor Long, and I just wanted to wish her a happy birthday.
Yeah, happy birthday to Kathy Long. She's 29 years old today.
Thank you. And I was going to look for, thank you, Mr. Chair. Also, the Board of Supervisors today acted on electric
That's right.
vehicle charging station
That's right.
language
Exactly.
per ordinance, per legislation. So
That's
we're all talking the right talk, moving in the right direction. We're charged.
great. Any other additional? Okay. Our next item, item number 9, is the approval of the grant funding of $19,880 for lower emissions school bus program projects to replace 4 compressed natural gas tanks and so forth and so forth.
Chair Zaragoza, members of the board, Stan Cowan, Air Quality Engineer. This is a request to provide a grant to Simi Valley Unified School District to replace their compressed natural gas tanks on one of their CNG buses. The grant amount, as you said, is $19,880 to replace all 4 tanks, and this grant is being awarded under the California State Guidelines of the Lower Emission School Bus Program. Previous school districts that have also received a similar award back in 2013, Hueneme School District, and more recently, Oxnard Elementary, Oxnard Union High School District, and Ventura Unified also received CNG school bus tank replacement awards. The CHP requires these tanks be replaced for safety reasons every 15 years. The funding for this program comes from $2 DMV fees, which were made eligible back in 2012. If these projects are funded, the emission reductions over the next 10 years will be 5.4 tons of NOx, 2.6 tons of ROC, and 40 tons of CO, plus a 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. A new grant agreement with the school district will require them to operate the bus for at least 5 more years. And besides approval of the grant, we ask that you authorize the auditor controller to process the accounting transaction and authorize the APCO to sign the grant agreement. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? Need a motion? So do we? is
I'll
that a
move
motion?
approval.
Okay, first and a second. All in favor? Do we need a roll call on that? No. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So that's 6/10, but we're okay? Okay. That's been approved. Thank you. Item 10 is approval of authorization for the Air Pollution APCO to execute a grant agreement with California Lutheran University and the Port of Hueneme to assist with the vehicle charging infrastructure projects.
Yeah, Chair Zaragoza, members of the board, Stan Cowan, Air Quality Engineer. Back in 2011, your board voted to have the district participate in the California Alternative Renewal Fuel and Vehicle Technology Program, which encourages electric vehicle charging infrastructure along the Central Coast. Ventura County APC, as the lead agency in the county to promote EV charging stations, has fees that may be used to leverage other funding for this kinds of program. Since these infrastructure charging stations do reduce motor vehicle emissions, they are eligible for DMV fee usage under state guidelines. This proposal consists of 2 projects, very similar size, one at California Lutheran University in Thousand Oaks and one at the Port of Hueneme to the Port District itself. Each grant provides $14,000 to completely pay for the equipment and part of the installation for 2 dual-corded charging stations at 2 separate locations so that you can charge 4 vehicles simultaneously. The grant only provides funding for equipment. The grantee must supply funding for part of the installation, operation, and maintenance. Both the CLU and the port have substantive commitments to advancing electric vehicles and sustainability, and all these charging stations will be accessible to the public. If approved by your board, authorize the APCO to sign grant agreements with both CLU and the Port of Hueneme. We're happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of staff?
One
Paula?
question. So these are going to be level 2 chargers?
Yes, level 2.
Okay. And is there any thought into looking at DC fast chargers?
We did put a DC fast charger, we helped fund a DC fast charger for the city of Thousand Oaks a few years back at their transportation center. The problem with there is the costs are typically a lot higher, but there's, like you say, there's a big demand for that. With more EVs on the road.
Right, especially
then-
with things like the Chevy Bolt coming up that'll... Okay, thank
but,
you.
Yeah, sure.
How many hours does it take for normal, charging?
So it depends on the vehicle, but for level 2, it takes maybe 3 to 4 hours to charge, 80%.
It's not an overnight issue like it initially?
No, it wouldn't be overnight.
Yeah, so 2-3 hours, that's good.
Or 3 to 4
3 to 4
hours.
hours.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a couple of
Commissioner?
questions. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think this is great. Can you just say, will Cal Lutheran or the Port of Hueneme charge people who use the charging stations?
I don't believe so. I don't think they're going to be.
And secondly, does anyone happen to know if Cal State Channel Islands has charging stations?
Yeah, in fact, we did fund several stations in one of their outer parking lots
Great.
a few years
Okay.
ago.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay, what's the pleasure of the board?
Move to approve.
Got a first and a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody oppose? Okay, that's approved. Our next item is receive and file a study session regarding air toxics hotspots program, prioritization procedure. Mike?
Chair Zaragoza, members of the board, I'm Mike Villegas, Air Pollution Control Officer. I wanted to give your board the opportunity to come up to speed on this program because it's going through some significant changes. First, I'm going to give you some background on the current air toxics hotspots program the district implements. Under this program, certain facilities are required to prepare detailed emission inventories on the releases of all the air toxic compounds these facilities have. The district is then required to review these inventories and then to prioritize the facilities into categories high, intermediate, and low. Any facility categorized as high priority is then required to prepare a detailed health risk assessment. If the health risk assessment shows that there is a significant risk, the facility operator is required to notify the nearby public, and then they work with the district over time to reduce that risk. To date, since 1989, the district has required, under this program, 67 facilities to prepare these detailed health risk assessments. After the facilities prepared these assessments, 15 facilities actually showed that they posed a potential significant risk to the nearby public. And I have good news. Of these 15 facilities, all of them working through the program have reduced their risk to below the significance threshold. In 2015, Cal EPA's Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, referred to as OHIHA, updated the guidelines for the preparation of health risk assessments that are utilized by all the California air districts. These updates were made in response to the Children's Environmental Health Protection Act of 1999, which was a piece of California legislation that basically directed OHIHA to look at potential risks in early childhood from toxic compounds. And based on the most recent science, it's showing that early exposure to carcinogens, in other words, exposure during your childhood, can actually increase your lifetime risk of contracting cancer. So that early exposure it has more of an effect than exposure later in life, is basically what the science has shown. So based on this, OHIHA is now basically revising the guidelines on how these health risk assessments are going to be prepared. And what we're expecting to see is for carcinogens is an increase in calculated risk. As part of implementing this updated program, we are going to need to update our prioritization procedures, basically how we score these facilities in determining who needs to prepare a health risk assessment. And of course, we're expecting that with updates to our procedures, we're going to see more facilities having to prepare health risk assessments than under our current procedures. This slide gives you kind of the history of the prioritization procedures. And these are different procedures. These are the procedures not for the preparation of the health risk assessments, which were prepared by OHIHA, but these guidelines were prepared by CAPCOA, which is the Association of the Air Districts, working with the Air Resources Board and OHIHA staff on how to develop our prioritization procedures. Prioritization is basically a conservative initial way to look at a risk representation for a facility. It then allows the district to place these facilities into high, intermediate, and low priority classifications. As I said before, the high priority facilities will end up preparing health risk assessments. And one thing to keep in mind, because these prioritization procedures are conservative by nature, we're expecting that once facilities complete their health risk assessments, we're expecting to find that some of them aren't showing the risk at a significant level. And this is played out in the...
Before you continue, what kind of adjustments do they have to do? Do they have to buy new equipment, or they?
That's really
we're not
getting
even there yet.
Into the risk reduction area, and we're working towards that. But right now, what we're doing is trying to get our program up to speed so we can prioritize these facilities and get those health risk assessments completed. But you're right. Basically, what's happened when you look at some of the facilities, you would look at types of facilities that would emit air toxics. So let's say you had a hard chrome plater, which we had at one point in this county, or a larger chrome plater, which we had. You'd also be looking at gasoline dispensing facilities, which are small facilities, but they're working with a compound that contains toxins.
The reason I'm asking, because I think if my numbers are right, the last update was about 21 years ago.
Yes, and really when you look at developing the science for exposure to carcinogens in early life, it takes literally decades to get peer-reviewed studies where you can get an agreement that this is the new best science. And as you're aware, there's studies, different scientists look at things slightly different, and it does take the states quite some time to reach a conclusion on this is the best way to move forward. And I think the positive thing here is we're seeing that when science changes, the state and the air districts are stepping in to address it.
Okay.
I wanted to point out what we saw was, even though we had 67 facilities prioritized as high in the current program, only 15 had the potential to pose a significant risk when the detailed analysis was completed. So we kind of expect that to happen again because, as I said, the prioritization procedures are quite conservative. For prioritization, we use what we call the emissions and potency procedure. And what we look at is the quantity of emissions emitted from the facility. And then for those compounds emitted, we look at the toxicity and the potency. And then the distance to the public, be it a home, a workplace, a school. Next up, we calculate a numerical score, or actually 1 to 3 numerical scores for each facility. 1 score for cancer effects, 1 for chronic non-cancer, and 1 for acute non-cancer. And what we do is we look at those scores and we do the prioritization based on the highest of those scores. As I said before, since OHIHA has changed the guidelines to deal with early childhood exposure to carcinogens, what we're seeing is changes on the cancer scores and not any significant changes on the non-cancer side. We're not expecting to see significant changes there. The other refinement we're seeing here is that OHIA has looked at multi-pathway pollutants. And these would be compounds that would be emitted into the air, but later deposited into soil, and there could be other routes other than inhalation of exposure. It could be mother's milk, dermal absorption, ingestion. So, you think of, working in the yard, your hands are in the soil, and then when you think of your kids playing in the yard, they not only do they play in the dirt, they have a tendency to put their hands in their mouth. And so that type of thing certainly exists. And so what we're seeing there is we're going to see a factor that would increase the cancer score if the compounds were multi-pathway. And this, like I said, is the latest advances in science. The good thing here with the prioritization procedures is it allows the district and the regulated community to work on the facilities with the highest potential to generate a significant risk. So we're putting the resources and effort where we think the problem is. The other thing is when this next go-round, to keep in mind, they're going to be doing updated health risk assessments with the new OHIHA guidelines. So we're going to have to expect some of these facilities will see increases in their cancer scores and the risk from cancer when they do the health risk assessment. The other positive in using the prioritization procedures is for facilities where the risk is very low and they have very low probability of posing a problem, those facilities are not put through the burden of preparing an unnecessary health risk assessment. There are other refinements, and I want to touch on just 2 of them here. And there are refinements, I think, as we become more, as this program matures, OHIHA and the districts, and the other big change is computing power. There were times when running some of these models required basically what we would call like kind of an old mainframe computer, and now a PC can do things that were not possible in the past, and these are available to basically every engineer in the state working on this program. But OHIHA looked at workplace exposure, and when you think about it, your residents, you're there. In general, you have the potential to be there 24/7, but not at the workplace. So there is a new adjustment factor going in to decrease exposure for the public at workplace. And when I talk about workplace, I'm talking about the facility basically next door to the source of the emissions. So these are not workers at the facility in question, but they're next door to it. So we're looking at decreases in their exposure time. And the other thing that's going to be a little different is we're going to be calculating scores separately for chronic non-cancer and acute non-cancer, where acute is defined as an infrequent 1-hour exposure, and chronic is continuous exposure over a fairly significant portion of a lifetime. I know every time we bring up the question of the word cancer in public, it generates a lot of questions and interest. As we work forward with this, we're going to be doing a workshop with the local facilities because we need to hear from them and the consultants that help them with the health risk assessments. And I think we can move forward, and this is just kind of the next step in this program. And when you look at the difficulties is certainly, when you look at the old procedures, there were assumptions made that, in essence, calculated lower cancer scores than the new science is going to show. And, communicating that to the public is going to be very interesting because the numbers are changing, and, there's the potential that there's always that situation where a facility can move from below significant risk to high when you change the calculation procedure. So
Michael, give us the definition of ALEHA. What
it's the
ALEHA?
Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. It's a division of California's Environmental Protection Agency.
Thank you. Commissioner Ramirez, I think.
Thank you. I want to ask if you know, Mr. Villegas, if there's an assessment of things that are not airborne, soil, water, et cetera.
This program that we implement is strictly air
Right.
toxics. I know that OHIHA works with Department of Pesticide Regulation on that front. And I'm not sure of OHIHA's other work in areas outside of pesticides and air.
I'll investigate myself, but I think it'd be
Yes.
good for us to know because things don't just stay in the air, they go down into the soil, and
Well,
as you
that's
say.
exactly
Yeah.
what's coming up here with some compounds that can be airborne and then deposit on soil. That's where we're taking into account that multi-pathway pollutant exposure,
Right.
which will increase the calculated cancer score.
Well, maybe you can bring that information back to us if you.
Yeah, and then this is something, I wanted to run this by your board because we've got a lot of big items coming up at the end of the year, most notably Air Quality Management Plan and all the Carl Moyer projects. And since we're going to be coming back to your board after the workshop with the approval of the new prioritization guidelines, I just wanted to give you that background.
What's the timeline on this, Michael?
It could be coming back as soon as November, if not December.
That's
what I'm thinking.
Can I have a follow-up, please?
Go ahead.
Thanks. So you've mentioned that there's already a preliminary assessment of these facilities, correct?
Yeah.
In our county?
Yes, we've worked through the existing prioritization guidelines and reviewed health risk assessments to the previous version of the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessments protocols for preparation of those health risk assessments. So what we're seeing in the next go-round is we're going to prioritize using the new guidelines, and the health risk assessments will be prepared using OHIHA's new guidelines. So we're expecting to see increases in the number of facilities preparing health risk assessments and potentially the cancer scores of those.
So is there a list that's public, or is that not public? of
We will,
what
it
these
is public,
facilities-
and we can provide all that information, certainly.
So the public will be
And we
notified.
we do an annual hotspots report to the state, and that is on our website, so.
Okay. Thank
But,
you.
the good news is, right now, we don't have any facilities posing a significant risk because of the 15 that did have taken actions to
Have already
reduce that risk.
corrected. Supervisor
So
Long.
originally, their assessment had 67, then there were 15 with the risk, and now they've abated that. And so that's the baseline that you'll start from with this new
That's correct.
level of, okay.
So, once we went through prioritization, we had 67 high priority. They did their health risk assessments. 15 of those showed a significant risk. They took action to mitigate that risk.
That's great. Any other questions of Mike? Okay, this is a receive and file.
Yes, it is.
I'm sorry, receive and file. Do we need a motion for that? A first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Mike, that's approved. Our next item is the approval of the cancellation of the regular Air Pollution Control Board meeting for October the 11th, 2016. Okay, so all in favor? Any opposed? Okay, so our next meeting is going to be November the 8th. And that's right, that's election day. It's going to be a quick one, right, Mike? That's going to be election day. That's right.
We're trying to keep, basically, we're working with RMA also. They've got some items, and I'm trying to kind of spread the work in our board meetings to allow them time for agenda items also with the Board of Supervisors. And then, as you're well aware, the Board of Supervisors is dark on October 11th. so
11th, right.
Might be an issue getting a quorum, so.
Okay, so our next item is going to be we're approved, adjourned as far as this meeting is concerned, and we have a special meeting for the standing committee at the large conference room over in the fourth, CEO large conference room. So we're adjourned. Thank you.